are in the Embassy of Venezuela, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and we're here as part of the Embassy Protection Collective. And we're here because the embassy is threatened by the opposition and by the U.S. government. Already the opposition has taken the military attaché in Washington, D.C. and the New York consulate. So this is not an imagined fear, but a real one. And as part of the collective, what we've been doing has been holding forums and live streaming them on a whole range of issues. And we thought the Assange case was an important one. And of course, when we thought of covering Assange, we thought of you and Consortium News, because really since the beginning of the Assange era, before you even were part of it, you were editor. Consortium News did great work on that. And Joe has been a relentless advocate for Julian Assange every Friday for a long time now. Long time. You've been holding vigils on behalf of Assange to draw attention to it, and they cover the issue regularly. So, and Joe's doing a great job. Consortium News, if you don't know it, is I think one of the best independent media outlets that we can go to, especially for foreign policy issues. And Joe is the editor and has been doing a fantastic job. So please welcome Joe Lauria.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you a question about the UN mission in New York.
Yeah.
That's still held by Chavez.
No.
Sorry, by Maduro, correct?
That was, the UN mission was, the UN mission is yes, but
Now, the General Assembly would have to vote. I covered the UN for 25 years.
Right.
That's my background.
Right.
I know the General Assembly has to vote to recognize a new representation. For example, Assad in Syria has never lost his representative there. I think the same would probably happen, although I don't know.
That's what happened with Maduro so far. UN has not recognized.
I don't think the GA would vote in favor of the U.S. on this, despite their support from Europe and other regional states.
Yeah, so which creates a quandary. The State Department Office of Foreign Mission is supposed to base its determination of accreditation of missions on the UN
and OAS.
And the OAS, but so there's a discrepancy here.
And the OAS only.
The first time there was a discrepancy with the UN is saying what the US is saying.
And the OAS only recognized Guaidó by changing their internal rules. They couldn't get enough votes to do it legitimately, so they had to change their own rules to do it.
Right.
So that's where we are.
Right. Well, thank you for your introduction. You're kind of the opposite of what Julian was involved in. We are here to keep people out, and he was there to prevent it from leaving. Of course, he had gotten asylum 6 years ago by the previous government of Ecuador, which was allied pretty much with Maduro. And he, of course, was arrested on April 11th. 4/11 is the new day crisis. And I think it's a very defining moment that we're in when it comes to press freedom, what's happening with Julian Assange. Right now, if you're a politician, if you're a member of the media, even if you're just an average citizen, you have to take a stand now on this. It was a pretty bad situation he was in, but he was under international law protected by the 1951 Refugee Convention, which clearly states he cannot be kicked out, the asylum cannot end if he were to be sent to a country where he could be persecuted. That's the language of the 51 Convention that both the United Kingdom and Ecuador and the United States are parties to. They openly violated that, but international law is not recognized, or at least not respected by many countries, the most powerful ones in the United States in particular. There have been rulings against the U.S. they've just ignored, like the International Court of Justice saying they shouldn't be mining the harbors of Managua during the war, the Contra War, and they just ignored that. So Israel has ignored an ICJ ruling that the fence or the barrier that they built is illegal. They continue to do it. So unfortunately, the only body that can enforce international law is the Security Council, and the U.S. has a veto there. So it's good news that at least Maduro government, the legitimate government of Venezuela, is still represented at the United Nations. And I commend everyone here for holding on to this place, and for the government of Venezuela for allowing you to stay here and to show us, make a stand against the U.S. government trying to send a new guy, a legitimate ambassador here to occupy these premises. As I said, the Assange issue is you have to take a stand because even the Obama administration, which had the worst record prosecuting whistleblowers of any administration in U.S. history, They, of course, his DOJ prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other presidents combined previously. However, when it came to Assange, back in 2010, they impaneled the grand jury and they wanted to indict Assange. Now, you said that Consortium News, before I took over last April of 2018, had been on the side of Julian Assange, and that's absolutely true. I found a story that our late founder, Robert Parry, wrote in December of 2010, which was only about 8 months after that grand jury was impaneled. And he clearly stated that what they were trying to get Assange on was standard practice for investigative journalists. Now, a lot of people call themselves investigative journalists these days, and I think they do it with a great amount of liberty. They have no idea what investigative journalism really is. I've done some I don't call myself an investigator, but I have done some for the Sunday Times of London. I was part of the investigative unit. It's weeks-long, months-long projects, reading hundreds, thousands of pages of documents and interviewing many, many people. And very few reporters do that, and many mainstream news organizations no longer have the budgets for that as well, which is a huge problem, which is why WikiLeaks filled such a huge gap, for one thing, just on that level, let alone the content that he has published. So Bob wrote that he would often encourage his sources to even break the law to get material. He wrote that. You could read it. I republished it on Friday. You could break the law if, by doing so, you're revealing information that could prevent or at least reveal a much larger crime. Which, of course, Chelsea Manning did. She did sign, of course, a non-disclosure agreement that any classified information she had, she could not turn over to an unauthorized person. That's a crime. But the crime that the prima facie evidence, at least, of the crime that she revealed was, amongst other things, the centerpiece is the video, the collateral murder video, which shows American pilots in Black Hawk helicopters gunning down innocent Iraqi civilians on a street in a neighborhood in Baghdad. 2007, I believe. That's a much bigger crime than violating your Non-Disclosure Act. And Bob also said he would always egg them on for more information. First, if you have to commit the crime because of what I just explained, and give us more, I want more. So he already knew what was in this indictment, that they were going to get Assange for encouraging Chelsea Manning to give him more, and to break a little crime if necessary to get the information. And in fact, this is very, very key to understand. I can't say this often enough. Chelsea Manning had top secret clearance. That is the highest classification in the US government. She had access to virtually everything. I think everything. I'm hesitating because I've been reading Dan Ellsberg's book, Doomsday Machine, and I think he talks, there's another category that is to maybe classified itself, the category that only the president can see, and maybe one or two of his cabinet officials. But top secret is the top level. She could see everything. She needed no help to hack into a computer. The word hack doesn't appear in the indictment of Julian Assange. It was unauthorized intrusion, is what it says. And in fact, she didn't need to intrude because she had the access. What was she trying to do? The third thing that Bob Parry points out, you have to protect your source, obviously. You have to protect the identity of the source, particularly in a case like this, where you're encouraging them to break the law, right? But there's a practical reason. Of course, there's a moral and ethical reason why you want to protect this person, because they're going out on a limb for you as a reporter and for the public. But there's a practical side as a reporter. If the word gets out that you can't keep your anonymous sources anonymous, not too many more anonymous sources are going to talk to you anymore, and you're out of business. So you've got to make it clear to everyone that you are rock solid on keeping secret the name of your source. Assange understood all of these points. He was behaving like a journalist. He may not have gone to Columbia Journalism School. He may not have come up on the Metro desk at the New York Times or the Washington Post. Maybe he started as a copy boy. But the route that you take to get to where he was really unimportant. He understood what was involved. And he was practicing journalism there, written by one of the greatest investigative journalists of our time, Robert Parry, 8 years ago. And I say that without exaggeration because he broke some of the biggest Iran-Contra stories. We know the name Oliver North because of Bob Parry. I was at the Associated Press. And by the way, the AP tried to spike that story. They kept telling him, go back, get more, and then finally, so why don't you just get Oliver North to confess, even though you've got all the other information showing he was guilty of doing this, being in the basement of the White House, selling arms to the Iranian government, through an intermediary in Israel, and taking those proceeds and giving them to the Contras in Nicaragua after Congress had shut off the funding of the Contras. This is a clear violation of the Constitution, as Congress is the only body allowed to appropriate money. Plus, people died because of that scandal in Nicaragua. I find that a bigger scandal than even Watergate, because nobody died from Watergate that I'm aware of, not directly anyway. People died because of that. Collateral murder video showed people had already died. The idea, like Ellsberg's motive in the Pentagon Papers, many people had died in Vietnam. He wanted to stop more people from dying. The idea of putting out the papers was to try to end the war in Vietnam. The idea of putting out the collateral murder video was to try to end the U.S. occupation of Iraq, or at least to create a public reaction to that might force that, which is what happened in Vietnam. Public protests certainly had a big role in that, and that was fueled in large part, or some part, by the Pentagon Papers. So Julian Assange was practicing journalism, and Manning was breaking a small law, but she was not breaking into her computer, and Assange was not helping her to break into a computer. What he was doing was trying to find a way for her to sign in to what she was already legally able to access under an administrative pad, another name, or a nameless as admin, so there was no name, to hide her identity. She could have signed in under her own username, and they may have found out she did it. So she was trying to protect herself by signing in as an admin. They needed the password to go with that. That's what she couldn't do. That's what she asked Assange to help. The indictment says they weren't sure if it ever succeeded or not, incidentally. So this was only an attempt to help her hide her identity. Trump administration has used this very same evidence that Obama administration decided not to go forward with to indict Assange. And that's the evidence I just laid out, that he was trying to help her change her password. They knew that they have the option under the Espionage Act. 1917 Espionage Act, Section E says clearly that any person who has possession, unauthorized possession of classified material, and or disseminates that classified material can be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. It's very broad, to the point where anybody who's ever retweeted a WikiLeaks tweet that had that collateral murder video with it, or any other document that Assange was not authorized to have, if we retweet it, we are technically also liable to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, because we got possession of it. Because once a document is made public, the U.S. government doesn't consider it declassified.
That's right.
I've talked to American officials at the UN I've asked questions about documents that have been leaked, and they say, well, it's classified. I said, but I just read it. They said, it's still classified. Classified. And they also retroactively declassify stuff too, by the way. That's a whole other subject. So as far as the U.S. government is concerned, Assange has possession of and disseminated classified information. And he has. And technically under the Espionage Act, he could be prosecuted. No administration in history has gone that far. Even though it's on the books, they realize that's crossing a red line. That would criminalize journalism. That Section E of the Espionage Act does criminalize journalism. It comes as close as we have to the British Official Secrets Act. The British Official Secrets Act, however, allows the government to contact a publication and tell them not to publish something in advance. That has been tested, of course, in the Pentagon Papers case, when the Supreme Court ruled that the Department of Justice under Nixon had illegally issued an injunction to the New York Times and the Washington Post to stop publishing the Pentagon Papers. They did stop, but they sued and went to the Supreme Court. The court sided with the Times and the Post. Yes, it was a great victory for press freedom. But all it did was assert that the First Amendment is clear. The government cannot make a law abridging freedom of speech. The government cannot exercise prior restraint. Can't tell a newspaper or TV station or radio station or any media outlet, you cannot publish this. But once it's published, you can prosecute. They can be prosecuted. The majority opinion of the Pentagon Papers case actually said that. After you're publishing, then you're on your own. Governments can't tell you in advance. So Nixon actually impaneled a grand jury, his Department of Justice, in Boston to prosecute 2 New York Times reporters who were reporting the Pentagon Papers case. That got very close to using that Section E to prosecute journalists for publishing classified information, which again is legal but very questionable and needs to be challenged in the Supreme Court. The only other time a part of the Espionage Act was used that I'm aware of, well, there were two instances, I think, but one certainly, a publication called The Masses in 1918 was prosecuted on the Espionage Act for publishing an article calling on young men in the United States not to resist the draft in the First World War. That's a different section of the Espionage Act that deals specifically with interfering with the military draft. But on Section E of just possessing and disseminating hasn't been done. What happened in the Boston grand jury is, of course, Ellsberg's case collapsed because it was discovered that his psychiatrist had been wiretapped. The judge in his case had been offered a bribe to become FBI director.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how brazen it was. And it came out, it was mistrial over. He was free. By a miracle, Ellsberg was free. The grand jury in Boston afterward stopped as well. Now, not before those two New York Times reporters, and Dan Ellsberg told me this, I was out in his house in Berkeley about 3 weeks ago, and we were having a long, in-depth discussion about the Espionage Act. That's how much I know, why I know a bit about it, because I'm an expert on it. A guy who was prosecuted under it told me that those two Times reporters formally asked the prosecutors, were we also wiretapped? Never got an answer, and the grand jury ended.
Wow.
Here, so Obama, knowing all this history, at least his lawyers, knowing all this history,
Sorry.
Obama's lawyers knew that they would be going to this red line, and all they had Assange on was encouraging his source to give more and to hide his identity, and they decided they would not prosecute. And they left it at that. Now, we often say correctly that there's not much difference between administrations, particularly on foreign policy, but there are sometimes differences. There was at least a scintilla of conscience, or at least practicality, involved in the Obama Department of Justice thinking that we don't want to cross that line, because then we'll have what they themselves call their New York Times problem, which is if we prosecute Assange, how are we going to justify not prosecuting the New York Times, who also published the stuff that Assange put out, of course, as so did El País and La Repubblica and The Guardian and so many, The Spiegel. So many mainstream publications published the classified information that Assange published. One other thing I want to say about the Espionage Act, people say, why could they go after an Australian who was publishing at that time in Iceland, right?
Exactly.
You know, we're having a concert here as well today.
I'm so sorry.
A duet.
People say, well, how could they go after Assange? He's an Australian. He was working out of Iceland at the time. They did the collateral murder video, and in London and elsewhere, and he was moving around a lot. Nobody really knows where he was. But he'd never been in the U.S., as far as I know. And how could he do that? Because the original espionage, under the original 1917 Espionage Act, he would not have been able to be prosecuted. It was only the territoriality of the United States, its possessions, and U.S. ships on the high seas. But there was an incident in 1961 in Poland. A State Department official was caught in bed with another woman, married. He was in bed with another woman, bursting in the front doors with the security services of the Polish government, snapping pictures. That's the old way. That's very old technology. Break a door down and take a photograph, and then go back to the back room, to the dark room, and develop it. And then you got the evidence, right? So they approached him with the evidence. And they said, we want this, this, and this classified document. Otherwise, this is going into the newspapers. And the guy proceeded to save his marriage by giving over the classified documents. And this congressman's name I'm forgetting now, but I don't think we should remember his name. He made a big stink in Congress about changing the Espionage Act so that something that happens outside of U.S. territory, even though he was, I guess, on U.S. territory in the U.S. Embassy, but he gave the stuff over to them and it left the embassy. I don't know. But the point was, we can't prosecute this guy for giving over classified information because the act says it only has to be on U.S. territory. So we got to change it. And he tried apparently 3 or 4 times, and eventually he did. In '61, they amended the Espionage Act. So this act of possessing or giving away classified information can be prosecuted. Anyone can be prosecuted anywhere in the world. It became a global treaty of the jurisdiction of the U.S. everywhere. That's how they can get Assange now on that. But again, Obama didn't do it. Whatever we want to say, Trump says, I think to some extent accurately, that the media is the enemy of the people. I think he's right about that, but I also think Trump is the enemy of the people too. And so is Congress. And so are major corporations. They're all enemies of the people. I mean, he was right about that one. And he's certainly being an enemy of the press here, and worse than Obama, because they pulled back and he hasn't. And they've actually arrested this man. We all know the story now. Marina was in trouble with the INA papers, and he needed to deflect from that, and he didn't really want him there to begin with, and blah, 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 and he let the British police revoked his citizenship and his asylum. That's on Thursday, April 11th. And Assange is in prison now, and the last word is that he won't. His mother put out a tweet last night that his doctor says he needs to be hospitalized immediately, and he's not being hospitalized, and he's not able to see his lawyers anymore.
Whoa.
How come?
So is he getting any medical treatment?
Jan Robinson was I don't know about that. Well, the doctor went to see him, so he had medical attention.
Right.
But according to Christine Assange last night, the doctor concluded he needs to be hospitalized immediately, and they're not doing that. And when Jen Robinson went to see him the next day, or even that same day maybe, in prison, since then, she reports, Christine, that they can only speak to him on the phone. And as someone very smart pointed out to me last night, which means they can listen in on the phone.
Right.
Inside the prison is much more difficult. Chris, and I can't pronounce his last name very well, Frafson, the new editor-in-chief, the Icelandic editor-in-chief, the day before he was arrested, had this incredibly interesting press conference in London in which they revealed that 3 thugs tried to shake down and extort 3 million euros out of WikiLeaks by showing them samples of the surveillance they had of Assange.
Right.
And they showed pictures of him being examined by his doctor and meeting with his lawyers.
Oh.
And they said, if you don't give us 3 million euros, we're going to release this stuff. So he went to the police, and the police wired one of WikiLeaks' lawyers and went in there to negotiate the deal, but he was actually gathering more evidence, and now the judge is taking over to investigate this. That was revealed on Wednesday. Thursday they marched in the embassy, took him out. But the point he made, Kristen, at that press conference is you have more client-attorney privilege secrecy inside a prison than you do in the embassy, because they're not going to surveil a prisoner and talking to his lawyer inside the cell, most likely. Anyway. So you can't see him, but you could talk on the phone. So they're probably listening on the phone, which is not very good.
Is this being appealed by the lawyers?
I don't know that. I suppose.
happened.
Yeah, I'm sure they're asking to go and see him. Yeah. I would
And
imagine.
you said he couldn't go to the hospital?
Yeah, they're not allowing him.
Not yet, not the latest I saw. Now I just pretty much cover what I want to talk about. I want to add something about the Mueller report. Of course, it has everything to do with the 2016 election, and Assange's arrest and indictment has nothing to do with the 2016 election. That's not stopping our brilliant minds in the media from conflating these two. And then the average person who goes to work all day comes home tired and turns on the TV for an hour of news and then falls asleep. Needs to make the effort to find out more and is more likely to believe this garbage. The 2016 report about Assange, there is a lot about WikiLeaks in there, however. So there's a lot of speculation that if he's extradited here, Assange, he'll be able to give up some information about how he worked with Russia to do this. Well. You know, he's repeatedly said he didn't get it from Russia. He says he has physical evidence to show that it was not from any state whatsoever. He was never questioned by Mueller or his investigative team. And they knew where he was. And they knew he wasn't going to run away.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they never bothered going to talk to him.
That's interesting.
But the report says that this Guccifer 2.0 character and DC Leaks communicated with Assange and sent him all the files, the DNC and Podesta files, and they give the file name. That's the extent of the forensic evidence that's presented in this report. I don't believe that was in the indictment either. The GRU agents, the Russian military intelligence agents, who Mueller's indictment and his report claim are the people behind Guccifer 2.0 and DC Leaks. They just set up this as a front. And Assange, therefore, was communicating with them, and he lied when he put out this idea that maybe an American working for the DNC was later murdered was actually the source. Now, James Comey also testified under oath that they believe that Assange got the material not directly from Russia but through a cutout or an intermediary. Which would make sense if in fact Russia did hack these emails. They wouldn't want anybody to know. Why would they? This is an intelligence operation. The only thing people need to know are the people who need to know. The last people you'd want to tell is anybody in the damn Trump administration. Trump himself, big mouth. So the idea that they colluded with him was absolute ridiculous nonsense all along, and anybody with half a brain knew that, and we've been totally exonerated, those of us, from the very beginning of saying this is a lie, this is rubbish, this is a hoax. The part about whether Russia hacked or not is still open to question, but even if they did, I'm saying Assange would probably have known that, and if he was speaking to somebody, Gustav 2.0, by email or DC Leaks, how would he know who he was talking to? This was a source saying, I've got this material. Okay, as Bob Perry often pointed out too, when you're getting documents, the motive of the source really doesn't matter. The identity ultimately doesn't really matter if you can verify that they're accurate. If they're telling you a story orally, yeah, you got to know who it is, why they're telling you this, and you got to check it out. But when they just dumping documents on you and you can prove that they're real, which is what WikiLeaks does expertly, I don't know how they do that, but they've never been caught with a phony document over the million or so documents they've published. How would he know this was a Russian? So it didn't make sense in that report. And they also mentioned the cutout. So if he got it from a person, a human being, did he get some from a cutout human being, or did he get some from the Gustav 2.2 emailing under this text file? And if he did, how would he know that was Russia, if Russia was trying to hide behind this persona? So that's very, very shaky. But I think the idea that if Assange comes here and they're going to get him to confess or somehow fill in the gaps about some collusion is nonsense. I think what they want are his sources on other documents and stuff, like Vault 7. They already know they have a guy in jail that they're harshly treating for leaking the Vault 7, the CIA Vault 7 documents to WikiLeaks. So we've got an extradition hearing coming up, and that's key. Hopefully his lawyers can drag it out and bring it to the European Court of Human Rights, where it could last for a year, maybe, or more. And there's a slight chance with the Brexit disaster that the May government collapses, they call a general election, Corbyn becomes the prime minister. I've heard two different interpretations of whether it's the High Court that decides whether he's extradited, or whether and tells the Home Secretary to do it, or whether the Home Secretary ultimately decides. If it's the Home Secretary that decides, or has the power to stop it, if Corbyn, who on the day of his arrest said he should not be extradited, could appoint a Home Secretary that he knows will not extradite him. That's the glimmer of hope you have by him not being extradited.
Didn't the shadow Home Secretary?
She said.
Yeah, Abbott.
say
Yeah,
she wouldn't.
Diane Abbott also said the same thing. And then there's also 70 MPs in Britain wrote the same day of his arrest to May asking for him to be extradited to Sweden instead. That could be Britain wants just wash their hands of this complex issue and let Sweden take care of it. And they had never gave an assurance to Assange's lawyers that he would not be extradited to Sweden when he was wanted there for questioning only, not a charge, on these sexual abuse allegations. That's why he went to the embassy, because he could not trust that if he'd gone to Sweden. And then he asked, well, come to the embassy, I will answer your questions. I'm not running away from the question. And they wouldn't do it for 3 or 4 years, because we now know, because Stefania Morizzi did a FOIA and got the documents, the British government was severely pressuring Sweden not to come and question him there. This was never about Sweden or about jumping bail. It's about publishing Collateral Murder, Vault 7, and everything else that he did. This is the case of a government crushing a journalist who published information that revealed corruption and prima facie evidence of war crimes. That's why it's so clear cut. Everything else is rubbish. Not about 2016 election. Not about the rapes. Not about this. It's about an authoritarian government, the U.S. government, arresting a journalist because he published stuff that exposed them for what they are. And they can't have the public know that. They have to, and unfortunately, they have a corporate media that is in league with them. And while they may have published that Collateral Murder video once or written about his stuff, they have buried this now. So we're beginning tomorrow in Consortium News, I'll end with this, a series of WikiLeaks revelations. And we're going to go back, and almost every other day, we're going to just focus on what they gave to the world. The first one, of course, is the Collateral Murder, and the format is basically, what does it show? How did it come about? What was the reaction from the government, the U.S. military, and the media, and other foreign governments too? Government, politicians, the media, and the military reacted to, and we're going to do another one after that, and we're going to keep going because that's what the public needs to know. Why is he in jail? Because he published this stuff. Thank you.
Great. Wow.
Do you have any evidence?
Yeah, there's glasses
You
in.
got U.S. didn't show it off the water supply.
Not yet. Right now, we're still free to come and go. We'll see what happens after Thursday.
Questions?
Can you put this in the context of Chelsea Manning and what is the grand jury, and does Assange's arrest change anything in her case?
That's a tough question.
It's a very good question, and that is another aspect of this. Had this indictment been the last one,
Yeah.
we would have seen her walk out of that jail in Alexandria.
Right.
Because they're holding her because she's not refusing to testify in a grand jury about Assange. So clearly, they're working on another indictment. Probably what they call a superseding indictment, which would take the place of this one. This is kind of a placeholder that they just had to get in. Apparently, one day under the wire of the statute of limitations running out.
Wow.
Then they held it sealed for a year. Yeah, do you know that? On March 7th of 2018, I believe, they filed the indictment. Oh, they made it official. And it was going to run out on the next day. Then they kept it sealed for a year. And then they unsealed it, as Leona Brinkman said in that courtroom. Well, we can't unseal it now because the suspect may flee. Sorry?
Let's try not to flee.
Do everything you can not to flee. Or you can destroy evidence. Well, yeah, of course he had stacks of all these classified information behind him in the embassy. I mean, really. So they unsealed it the day he was arrested, which they said they were going to do. They kept their word on that.
Now,
Now, Chelsea, is the fact that she's still in there means they still need stuff from her to get them on something else. And she, in a sense, holds a lot of power here, maybe, that she could delay this superseding indictment if they need her testimony so much. I don't know that, of course. But they're holding her because they need something from her, and she's not going to do it. So she could maybe come up to works in terms of another indictment. And there's a whole other issue, too, about whether usual extradition treaties show that a government extraditing someone will extradite someone on a crime only if that crime is also a crime in their country. And then they will extradite him, and he or she could only be tried in the country that receives that suspect on the crime that he was extradited for. You can't start adding charges once you get them. But it's there's a thing that can be waived. Apparently, the British extradition, U.S. extradition treaty shows that you could waive this rule of specialty or something it's called.
Right.
So you could waive that, and I don't know.
Superseding.
And so that maybe he could be saddled with more crimes, but you could be sure they don't want to just keep him in jail for 5 years, which is the maximum of this
hacking.
so-called hacking, which charge, right? So Chelsea is sitting in a very interesting situation where she can maybe stop them or delay them or at least obstruct them from whatever evidence they need for this new indictment.
And CNN did announce that they are working on other indictments of Julian. So there's indication.
We know that because she's still in jail.
Yeah, that
Otherwise
shows it
she
too.
would've
That
left.
shows it. But CNN confirmed that
Indictment's out.
State
Yeah.
DOJ people have told CNN that they're working on other indictments, which will make the extradition interesting too. If they new indictments, that's going to change the balance of the extradition too.
Yeah, unless they fiddle with this and decide that we'll waive that, and yes, you can add more charges. Yeah, Britain's totally in league with the US. The British intelligence and the U.S. completely in league on this. There's no question about that.
You mentioned that they could possibly appeal this or take this to the International Court of Human Rights. European Court. Oh, okay. Do you think that we just went through an experience where the ICC was trying to investigate the United States for torture and war crimes, and pressure by the U.S. caused the pretrial group to, not allow that to proceed? Do you think that the U.S. has that kind of sway with the European Court of Human Rights?
Well, with certain governments, like the British government, and by the way, as long as Britain remains in Europe, there's an option for Julian to go there. Mm-hmm. And I asked whether, if in the course of a year-long process at the European Court of Human Rights, that Britain leaves the European Union, what would happen to his case? I didn't get an answer to that, but I would imagine they couldn't end if the legal process began. Whatever processes began
It wouldn't just end.
would have to
because
go
that-
till they, I would think, but that's probably in this long treaty that May worked out with Brussels that she can't get her parliament to approve. So those kinds of things are in this whatever, how many pages it is. So I didn't look into that yet.
So when May was Home Secretary, she stopped an extradition of someone who had also gotten into U.S. documents, and based on health reasons, she said it was not a. So it seems like the Home Secretary has that kind of power. So that was Theresa May before she became Prime Minister.
That was not Julian Assange.
Not Julian Assange.
Yeah. And he has health problems.
Yes,
we know
he
that.
does.
Yes.
But no, but the ICC. I mean,
That's horrible.
Pretty terrible.
this court is really a white man's court. Almost all the suspects have been black Africans, and not to say that those guys didn't commit crimes, but
There are a lot of white people committing crimes.
the fact that a lot of African governments are leaving the ICC, it would be a really good thing if they create their own court, because it should not be the white men going in there.
Yeah.
A black African court should try black African war criminals. It's an internal matter for them. This, of course, prosecutor is an African. That seemed to have been a PR move to put an African in front there, is to try to get away with this problem, and it hasn't worked. And she capitulated to this threat that she can't go to what? She can't go to Disneyland on holiday, and she can't. He blatantly said we won't allow them in the U.S. So like a couple of days later, they dropped this, which began way back under the previous Argentine prosecutor. I interviewed a lot of other reporters at the UN because I followed this ICC case from the very beginning, and he was the one who introduced this because Afghanistan is a member of the court, and these alleged crimes took place on the territory of Afghanistan. That's why the U.S. the jurisdiction extends to the U.S. The U.S. is not a member. Bill Clinton signed it. Bush unsigned it. It never went to the Senate for treaty ratification. But that was a special case where the U.S. was within the jurisdiction of the ICC, and look how Bolton reacted by saying you can't come to the United States. If you do that, and then 2 or 3 days later they dropped finally this case that's been going on for like 6 years.
I mean, she didn't just blame it on that, though. I mean, she blamed it on that they weren't getting cooperation with the
Well, that was
investigation.
the pre-trial. That was their justification.
That was not. Yeah, it was their
They wouldn't have the
justification. And they were raising the hopes of people, and
They wouldn't get the
they wouldn't really be able to get it. So, I mean, it is a shame though, because that would have been a breakthrough.
So Carlos has a question and Dave has a question.
I have a question about the media. I mean, they obviously profited from the leaked documents and all that. They published them, they sold newspapers, all that stuff. And now when Assange is in trouble, they have not shown any kind of solidarity for their colleague or anything like that. But I'm wondering, they like smear his character and so on.
Not all the media.
No, the mainstream media, commercial media, I guess. But as far as the potential danger that this espionage law poses for them, like, I mean, they could theoretically be accused of the same by, I don't know, some other country, Russia, whoever. Doesn't that concern them at least, that their reporters could be also charged with similar?
The number 2 legal counsel of the New York Times was on the West Coast about 6 months ago, and he made a speech to some judges in which he said, we don't like Assange, but we don't want him prosecuted. Because we know if they do that we could be in the crosshairs of the Department of Justice under Trump as well. So at least the legal office at the Times knows that. The editors, if you read their editorial, it was horrendous. We're journalists. We don't go in there and hack stuff.
It's terrible.
Not understanding, but I explained before that this wasn't a hack. This was an attempt to hide the identity of his source. So, I worked 25 years in the corporate media, some really big pay. I started at the New York Times as a stringer when I was 19 years old, and I wound up with the Wall Street Journal, and I worked at the Boston Globe. And so I know this mentality I know how hard it is to work with inside and try to get stuff in the paper. You pick your choices. I had several tense moments with Wall Street Journal editors because I wanted to get stories in there, but they were critical of the U.S., but they were factually correct, and they would either suppress it, ignore it, or cut things out of the story. So you know what you're supposed to write, what you're not supposed to write, even if you're aware. But many of them come up in this system and believe this stuff, and they're driven by career interests, vanity, becoming well known, getting better position, kissing ass, being close to power, like want to live vicariously. So it's not just American reporters. At the UN, I saw the press corps from 100 countries or more. When their foreign minister was in the UN building, running around after him, whatever he says, like stenographers, basically. So it's a real problem about independence and journalism and not being part of the establishment at all, and this cutting, not needing validation from establishment system or figures. once you feel like you're part of their system, you want to be somewhere in their hierarchy, you're already compromised, in my opinion. We want to start a new kind of society, that's dying. That old establishment is dying.
Yeah.
We don't want to attach ourselves to something that's dying. We want to create something new. This is what I think WikiLeaks was certainly doing, and Assange.
Exactly.
The technology was new, the way of delivering the news was new, the vast amounts of information was new, and the fact that it was all raw material that hung these people with their own words was kind of new, and that amount of documents. And they have to crush that. So, Consortium News, we're not running after the establishment. I don't care to be recognized. I've worked in the system already at high levels. I don't need, I want nothing to do with them. I'm practicing journalism. The way Bob Perry laid it out, the way I tried to do it when I was on the inside was very hard. Now I'm on the outside. And we're able to do it best we can. And we have a lot of limitations. We don't have the staff. We don't have the resources of big paper, of course. But we're trying to do the best we can to give something different point of view. What's left out of the mainstream media or what's omitted, what is a different angle than they take on stories they do cover.
David, I think David was next.
Yeah, I do believe what you're saying, but I'm going to ask this question anyway because I think the public is hung up, most of the public is hung up on this, the fact that supposedly these Russians were meeting with Trump Jr. Now I know Trump has old relations with Russian oligarchs, with mafia and stuff. He's got kind of a crooked past, but I think people they're assuming because there's some kind of connection going on, perhaps, with some Russians, they're assuming that they're putting that with the WikiLeaks thing. I don't know how to put this.
Yeah, well, as far as I understand, the Clinton campaign and DNC hired, through their lawyer and through Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele to put together this dossier. Before they even knew that their computers had been compromised, before their private company CrowdStrike, which is co-founded by an Atlantic Council, Russian, anti-Putin Russian, came up with this fanciful idea that they found evidence of Russian hacking because they left the name of the first Soviet intelligence agent in history and the Cyrillic letters in it. Now, that's very hard to believe that they would leave such silly clues behind. What I'm trying to say is if you go back throughout the whole first Cold War, including up to the George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton debate where Bush was trying to say, well, Clinton, he went to Moscow for a year. He was a student there or something. This idea of smearing your opponent as being somehow tainted by association with Russia goes way back in American political tradition. And I think there was an element of that in going after Trump before any of this happened. And now, what was revealed there? What was revealed was that whatever it was, Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to resign, and 4 other DNC things. And what was revealed was the corruption inside the DNC and the corruption in the media, that they would give their articles to the Clinton officials before they were published to have them approved. Mm-hmm. This is like the fireable offense at any big newspaper. You cannot show your source, your story before it's published to get their approval. So the emails that were released were so damaging that they had to immediately change the subject. Kind of like INA papers are damaging to Moreno has changed the subject, but let's get it now. That's it. And try to say that it was WikiLeaks that revealed these documents, which apparently it did not. You don't find them on their website anyway.
But the guy who did release it, he talked about it. I thought on one of the vigils there was a gentleman
Well,
from
that was
Ecuador.
one of an Ecuadorian journalist who told us that he knows who did it, but that's his view of it. He might be right. I don't know, but the guy didn't confess to it. So Russia has always been a great place to pin your opponent's wagon to, and also steal. There were parts of that Steele thing, like the most famous or infamous part was written by a functionary and an operative of the Clinton administration, of the Bill Clinton administration, and of Hillary associate. The one about the urination and of the prostitutes in the hotel. That was, according to the Washington Post, that was written by a guy called Cody Shearer.
Oh, really?
Cody Shearer is a longtime Clinton operative. He wrote that and gave it to his friend Sidney Blumenthal, of course very close to Max's father, very close to Hillary and Bill. And he gave it to Jonathan Weiner, who was a State Department official under Obama and previously with Clinton, I believe, who Bob Perry knew very well, had been one of his sources, and they had a huge row over Libya because Weiner was running the Libya policy under Obama, and Bob was telling me it's a disaster, and they had a big fight and they talked to each other. until Bob died. He never talked anymore. And Wiener gave it to his friend Christopher Steele. So that's the chain that Post lays out from a Clinton operative who wrote that section, and it wound up in the Steele memo. This was opposition research. Yeah, he was an MI6 guy, but this was not an intelligence report. Intelligence report gets vetted by the agent, gets vetted by his agency, gets vetted by other agencies in this country, is paid for by taxpayers, and is presumably to protect the taxpayer, because we know that's rarely what intelligence agencies do. They're protecting elite interests. But nonetheless, this was opposition research. This became the basis for this whole mania of collusion. And that has been laid to rest, for sure. So now he lied, Trump lied. I'm looking at the banners on the CNN and MSNBC. He lied, and only RT had collusion narrative totally debunked. You know, that's the headline. Sorry. He lied. If we impeached every politician who lied, there wouldn't be one person in any state house, any legislature in any of the 50 states tomorrow. They'd be gone.
Yeah.
He lied. Yeah, he lied. He lied. Sure, he lied.
So you pointed out, and it's certainly true that the thing that he's currently that Julian Assange is currently openly charged with is this conspiracy with Manning
to hide his identity and
yeah. So
get more, give me more.
With that being said, the Mueller report has enormous amounts that are redacted, mostly kind of in the territory of the report that deals with WikiLeaks generally, and the reasons for the redactions are could be a harm to an ongoing matter and grand jury. So I guess my question is, do you think that it is likely that Assange, once here, assuming he gets here, would be charged with crimes related to 2016 DNC?
I don't know. I do know that WikiLeaks put out a tweet with screenshot of all those redactions saying, we're glad that finally, it was clear that there was no collusion, and we are demanding to unredact this to clear us further. So they're pretty confident that whatever is in there is not going to nail them. Are they going to ask? Are they going to pin something on Assange about the election? I think they'd love to. I think Mueller would have loved to gotten this collusion thing. But he couldn't. He can indict GRU agents in Moscow because they are never going to show up in a courtroom in the United States.
Right.
So his assertions, he could say whatever the hell he wants because it's never going to be proven in court. And he also knew that this supine servile corporate media is going to not report it like an alleged GRU hacking. They just saying that Russia hacked it. There's no more alleged. They reporting it as fact. Whatever Mueller says is considered fact. And this is very dangerous. This is journalism 101. An indictment is not a conviction.
It's one side
So Mueller knows this too. I could say that. Now I'm not saying he didn't have real evidence, but it's not really clear from the indictment what evidence this is. You don't need to put evidence in the indictment. You just have to put what you think you're supposed to put the evidence out in the trial, right? And the indictment itself is not even considered evidence against somebody. It's just an indictment. So are they going to try to ask about that? Yeah, but again, even if Russia hacked, I don't think that he knew he was talking to Russia. He claims, and we have Comey saying it was an intermediary who gave him this stuff, not Russia.
Do you think he could even get a fair trial in the
No.
U.S.?
Oh, no.
Well, what do you think that trial would look like, and what should it look like?
If it started to veer towards fair, well, first it'd have to have a jury. First it'd have to have a jury, and if it started getting close to fair, then they would say, well, Your Honor, I'm sorry, but that evidence that the defendants want us in discovery to reveal is actually classified, so we can go in your chamber since you have clearance and we can show you. And then she comes out later saying, guilty, case closed.
You ready?
So they're allowed to hide the evidence. That's the problem. So how is that a fair trial?
And they're allowed to block defenses. They can't say why he released the information.
Oh yeah, he's not allowed ever to give a public defense. Ellsberg tells a story. He was out on the stand and he wanted to be able to say why he leaked the Pentagon Papers. No. Why don't they want that?
Because they don't want the people to know.
Because the jury, if they hear this, could nullify. They could nullify the conviction. They could say yes, he broke the law, but it was a law that shouldn't be a law, and he was That's what happened in the famous case of Joseph Peter Zenger back in colonial America, New York, in 1636, or whatever it was, when the governor of New York, the British governor, William Cosby, otherwise known as Bill Cosby, prosecuted this guy, Zenger, who was a printer, because he printed stuff, and the jury said, yes, it is against the law to publish this, against the great governor, but he proved it was true, so he's innocent. That's the, and everybody was to journalism school, and that's the beginning of our First Amendment.
That was revolutionary.
That was it. Yeah, part of the Revolutionary Act against Britain, more than 100 years before the Revolution.
Wow.
I got a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Or I'm glad that y'all keep pointing out when the mainstream media always gets to the leak, the DNC leak, they never ever have talked about the contents, and it just drives me crazy, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I remember we used to hang out a lot. Well, when we attended the Manning trial in Fort Meade, and you'd have to hang out in the trailer for interminable times. And I remember Jocelyn.
Right.
Yeah, she had just come back from a hacking conference because people were just talking in Germany, and she said, you know, hacking there isn't considered the same way as it is here. She's like, as a matter of fact, there were even some people from the U.S. military there recruiting hackers, you know, and then that, I mean, and that's a common fact, right? So even that coupled with the fact that you can't, I'm no IT expert, I'm like Luddite, not by choice, you know, just by talent, but you can't really trace, I mean, you can really cover your footprints if you're trying to show that somebody hacked. So it's kind of like spy versus spy stuff when you're accusing someone of hacking when the capability has been, you know, people are, you know, the military is actually trying to recruit.
When they do it, it's good.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Somebody else does it to them, throw away the key. NSA has a whole team of hackers, the NSA. You know, the Pentagon, I mean, CIA, certainly, the Israeli government. They hack all the time. They're hacking one another. I wouldn't doubt if 5 governments hacked the DNC email, including the French and the Israelis and the British. Who knows?
And what
The Russians may
should
have
have been out there anyway. Well, we agree of all of the other stuff, the war crimes, which a lot of the public wouldn't like, would go, oh, no, she's great.
Yeah.
But the DNC stuff, that should have been public.
Well,
and,
you know,
that's like not a foregone conclusion.
One of the
that
things
it's
she
never
said
been.
in one of her Goldman Sachs speeches was, I have a private position and a public position.
Right.
Now, there's a very important moment in this film, Risk, about Assange by Poitras, in which he's on the phone. She let him tape him and many crucial moments in his story. One of them, he's on the phone with someone and he says, yes, we just got some, looks like interesting emails about Hillary Clinton. Unfortunately, we don't have anything on Trump right now. He wanted stuff on Trump.
Yeah.
Number 2,
Yeah.
Trump was an open book. We knew he was a misogynist, a racist, a numbskull, a buffoon,
Bankrupter.
making fun of disabled people, all kinds of things. You know, he wasn't a
Mocking.
politician hiding himself behind an image like Hillary Clinton and all the others. So number 1, the Access Hollywood thing came out, didn't damage him. So not that there aren't stuff that they could have hacked, but he didn't get it. He didn't get it. And the other thing I hear is, why didn't Julian put the stuff out during the primary? Then maybe Bernie would have won. So maybe because he didn't have him in time, and maybe it takes a certain amount of time for them to verify all these emails. So he got him when he got him, from whomever he got him from. He didn't get anything from Trump. I think that statement on the film shows that he would have put out the Trump stuff if he had it. He got stuff, and she's not supposed to publish because he didn't have the other side too. Then he'd be suppressing news.
Right.
And he put it out when he was able to put it out. Did he delay it a few days so it would have maximum impact before the convention? Very likely, perhaps, but
That's
you
just
want your
smart.
news to have an impact too. And what's wrong with that? Yeah. The idea that he was trying to just get Hillary because he hated Hillary. He certainly did not like Trump. There's no way Julian Assange was a Trump supporter. He just didn't have any stuff on him, and he would have if he published it if he had. So, and he didn't do it when he did it. He published it when he had him.
Other questions?
So I just have one. So May 2nd is the pre-trial hearing on the extradition.
No,
Preliminary hearing.
Somebody correct me today. I don't know. I don't really know.
Okay.
That May 2nd is his sentencing for jumping bail.
No, that's a preliminary hearing.
Are you sure about that? That's what I
And
thought.
then June 12th is the U.S. has to make its case
June 12th.
by June
Correct.
12th. And if the case, so that's when the UK decides, or
No.
how does this
It's going to
work?
take a lot longer than that.
Okay.
Well, I don't know that.
It's a long process.
They
I
need
mean,
time to decide.
these extraditions can last years. I mean, some of multi-years. I mean, I'd be shocked if this lasted less than a year probably could take 3 years.
Well,
And Julian has to
and
stay in the
all
whole time.
and all well, unfortunately, unfortunately,
They're not going to give him bail for skipping bail.
That's right. He skipped bail, so that's going to get very hard to get bail. So,
Well, it was kind of extraordinary circumstances.
I think fighting for better jail conditions, I think, is a worthwhile fight right now.
Yeah, that's a question I have. I don't think you talked about it, sorry, but his prison conditions are not too, aside from his medical, but he's in, I mean, it was reported that he's in like a Britmo kind of thing.
Well, it's been called the Gitmo Belmarsh, and that was because of a previous law that has now been lifted. The House of Lords ruled that this was against the human rights charter of the European Union, and Britain's still part of the European Union. That was a law which said that they could hold people on terrorism charges indefinitely. Well, actually, without even charging them, on suspicion. That is clearly against, habeas corpus, which started in Britain how many centuries ago, that you can't throw somebody in jail without charging them with something. That is no longer the case, but that's where it got that reputation. However, terrorists have been in there, or terrorism suspects, famous train robbers, all kinds of people have been in there, spies, whatnot. I don't have any idea what his conditions are like.
I'm just, there's
I
not
have
going to
no
be like
idea.
a Whitey Bulger or anything happening.
Yeah, I don't know. All I know is he's, from what his mother said last night, his lawyers cannot only speak to him on the phone.
It's terrible.
And his doctor asked for immediate hospitalization, and that still hasn't happened last I looked.
Any other questions? I'll make one comment. I'm so glad that you're covering what the impact of his publications have been, because they are really, it's a phenomenal.
Well, we could do it for 3 years without
It's
stopping.
amazing,
Yep.
amazing. One today I wrote about on Popular Reasons just before you got here, because of the Ukraine election. 73% to 25%, the comedian won.
Against the other comedian.
Against Poroshenko.
Against
Against
Oh,
Poroshenko. And well, that relates to WikiLeaks in that there was a WikiLeaks release about OU. And OU is Our Ukraine, which is what the government called Poroshenko, because he had been a U.S. government informant for years. And and what's interesting about there's several
My
memos.
turn now.
There's several memos about it, and one of them talked about how OU, our Ukraine, is there's good evidence he's corrupt, but it's a price we have to pay. And there's also memos about how OU and the woman who came in third place pretended to be allies, but really hated each other. And so it carries over into this election that she came in third in the first run, the first election. He came in second, and then most of her voters went to the comedian. So what's so interesting about all that is that the WikiLeaks documents pretty much predict what ended up happening. Corruption got worse. Poroshenko got wealthier. The country got poorer. The top two pro-U.S. candidates hated each other and beat each other up. And, it was an opening for someone to
And
stop.
the comedian won, proving that in Ukraine, like America, the truth is a joke.
Yeah, exactly.
Big
So,
joke.
Do a quick for the people on live stream about the call to action.
Oh, thank you. I should have said that at the beginning. Today we announced, and we're going to be promoting it this week, call to action to support Assange on May 1st and May 2nd, around that May 2nd hearing. It's going to be International Days of Action. We had a debate among activists about what day to do it, because May Day is also a big day, May 1st.
Not in this country, but everywhere else.
But some May Day organizers in this country, people are trying to make it something in this country.
Right.
May Day organizers, some wanted to do it, have Assange on that day, others didn't. So we had a mixed reaction. And so we're going to do the first and second, so people can do what works best for their community. So we're going to be, but it's a global thing. We want to have a big turnout in Westminster Court.
Well, Assange could fit into any protest, because I just saw a film from yesterday in Paris at the Yellow Jackets
Yes.
protest. Viva Assange. Saw that picture?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta find that.
That's good.
Great.
That's a good. I gotta
The
find
People's
that.
Journalist.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Let's give. Oh,
Medea.
Medea, you wanted to say something?
Well, are there any mainstream journalists who are doing good work on this?
It's a good question. I can tell you that the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is not always a radical organization by any means, has come out in support of Assange.
Good.
Kenneth Roth, the head of Human Rights Watch. Yeah, I heard a lot of not pleasant noises from around the table. So we know his record. No, Human Rights Watch isn't always wrong on everything, I have to say. But he wrote a piece.
That's a strong endorsement. They're not always wrong on everything.
No, Look, I've been to press conference, the last press conference I went to Human Rights Watch, they were trying to highlight what they thought were war crimes led by the U.S.-backed coalition in Yemen, and it was a killing up in the
No, they're
north
good
of
on
Yemen.
some things.
So they're not afraid to call out the U.S. for committing war crimes or supporting war crimes. Anyway, Roth wrote a piece in the Guardian of all papers saying that this is wrong, this arrest, and we have to support Assange. And we've got Amnesty International too, which isn't always wrong about everything, and groups like that. Now, you asked about mainstream journals. Well, as I said, the lawyer for the New York Times knows the implications, but the New York Times editorial department doesn't seem to know that. And I have not seen any column, not read everything, obviously that's been written about this, but there was a nice column in the Sydney Morning Herald, but I don't know if it was by a Herald journalist. I think it was some op-ed. So, USA had an op-ed. Exactly, they had an op-ed. But mainstream people, they're keeping their heads down and shutting up. Now, I don't watch cable news, so you can answer that to me. I just don't watch it. So, did anybody on MSNBC or on CNN? Well,
weirdly,
no, I don't
Fox's
know.
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson, right.
Tucker Carlson.
That probably also isn't going to make nice noises in this room, but
What did he
On
say?
some things.
yeah, every now and again
He's actually pretty good on war sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, let's thank Joe for
Thank
coming
you,
to
Joe.
join us in the
Welcome.
Venezuela.
Very good, very good. Thank you. That was good.
Now we could all answer our phones.
I was gonna say, and we can keep talking. I just didn't want to keep the live stream.
I want to know if you have